Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's edition, quarantine edition of As Told by Theolyn is going to focus on Raise the Red Lantern by Su Tong. So if you're like me and you're cooped up, you're trapped in quarantine and you'd like to be someplace else, to travel to another place mentally, this is a great place to travel, to be out of your comfort zone, out of anything you ever understood. I'm going to focus on the first novella. This is Raise the Red Lantern. It's got 3 novellas. It does track with the movie. The movie came after this novella. And the movie tracks at about 90% to the original story. So if you're familiar with the movie, you might know some of this story. This is a very rich source. If you're not familiar with the movie, what is stopping you? It maybe you don't like subtitles. I remember I rented the movie from Blockbuster when it first came out and was pressed to America, to the US with subtitles, and I didn't know what to make of it. And in fact, I think the first time I watched it, I didn't even like it. Then it was one of those movies where it just grew on me and it grew on me, and I think Aaron fell asleep while we were watching it, and I watched it again, and I remember distinctly. That's why I remember it, because there's some opera singing in the movie, and he was like, "That sounds like a cat in heat," and so yeah, I went and of course I bought it. I wore it out. Then I bought it on DVD, and I don't know how many times I watched it. I know it by heart. So when I say that it tracks with the movie, I know the movie so well that I can say where it is different than the book. But we're going to talk about the book today. Let's talk about China. This is a novel that doesn't even mention a lot of dates. You could be back in ancient China in this novel, and it's so interesting about their customs, their habits, their dress, their mannerisms. It's absolutely fascinating. So in Raise the Red Lantern, we're being introduced to the Chen family. And I'm going to butcher his name, but the master's name is Chen Zuquan, but we'll call him Master. And the Master's 50 years old. He's had a first wife many years before, and he's had subsequent wives, and he's ready for his 4th wife. And we're introduced to Lotus, who is his 4th wife. Back in the day, it was fine for Chinese men, if they had the means, to take more than one wife. Usually by the time you get to the 4th wife, the other ones are pretty well used to it. In this case, you have each concubine, even though their wives will call them concubines. Each concubine has their own little area, almost like a little pavilion, and then they have their common areas. And so they don't necessarily have to see each other except for meal times and at certain occasions and things of that like. They may have children, they might not have children, the children might play together, and so on. Chen Zuquan, the 50-year-old, is taking on his 4th wife named Lotus, and that's where the story starts. Lotus gets out of her sedan, and we're not talking like a Chrysler sedan. We're talking about a vehicle that's being carried by 4 men, and we're kind of told she's been on the road for 30 days from her little village from where Chen has essentially bought her from her stepmother. She's arrived on the scene. She's a 19-year-old college student, and her father had a tea business that went bankrupt, and he kills himself in front of the family, and her stepmother sells her essentially to Chen Zuquan. So Lotus is not the happiest camper on the campground, because all her hopes and dreams are dashed. And here she is, being the 4th mistress or wife to Chen Zuquan. When she steps out of the sedan, she wipes her face with her sleeve, and the servants see this as a poor relation. They're not impressed with this girl. She doesn't introduce herself to the servants, so they think she's just some poor relation of the Chen family. And come to find out, the servant that she asks if she can wash her face with this cold water that's in a bowl, they're washing out yarn. She asks the servant, and the servant is kind of snippy with her because she doesn't introduce herself. The servant's name is Swallow, by the way. All the names have significance. They're symbolic. Swallow is essentially like, well, who are you? And she says, you'll find out who I am. So we see that Lotus has a little bit of, she's a little sassy, but she's basically seen right out of the gate as sort of a poor relation until the servants realize who she is. woe betide her bad start with Swallow. So we're introduced to the Chen household. We've already seen Swallow. Swallow gets into it a little bit with Lotus in the very beginning, which isn't an auspicious start. And then we're introduced to his first wife named Joy, who isn't joyful. She's about Chen's age and she's got children with him, and she's not into all these other wives very much. We've got the second mistress named Cloud, who is shown to be just a very sunshiny person, the opposite of her name. And we've got the third one that comes on the scene, and her name is Coral. And she's the opera singer, the former opera singer. So Swallow, the maid that has words with Lotus in the very beginning, before she realizes that she's another wife, is given to Lotus as a maid, as her personal valet or servant. She goes ahead and she checks Swallow's hair for lice. She has her bend down and she checks her for lice. And then she, gets all snitty with her and says, go wash your hair, go wash your hair. I don't like lice. And Lotus is rude with Swallow, and Swallow tells the master, because he's standing right there, sitting right there, that she'd washed her hair yesterday. And they basically say, go do it, Lotus, go do what your mistress says to do. So they're kind of nasty to the maids. But Swallow, not to be outdone, goes and gets petty revenge on Lotus by, when she has to go and wash out Lotus's clothes, she goes and spits all over them. So you can see right in the beginning of the novel, we got all kinds of Real Housewives of China. Yeah, it's going all crazy right from the beginning, and it just goes. So bring on the domestics, right? Right. Bring on the Chinese concubine domestic arguments. So Lotus gets her first reception from the other wives. She goes to meet Joy, and Joy is doing her Buddhist prayer beads, and she bends over and the beads break and spill all over the floor, and she's mumbling about it's a sin, it's a sin. So she doesn't get a very good first impression of the first wife. The second wife, she gets a great impression for Cloud, and because Cloud acts all friendly and she brings out snacks for Lotus and calls her elder sister and she calls Cloud elder sister. So that's like a sign of respect. So on their first night together, Lotus and the master are shown to be sexually compatible, and they get along quite nicely, and you find out that Lotus's status in the household goes up. Whoever's pleasing the master is going to get the most perks and privileges for the moment. But not to be outdone, on the very first night of their, I guess you'd call it their wedding night, Cloud has her servant come over. They all have their own little servant. So Lotus has Swallow, and they all have their own servants. And Coral has her servant sent over to say, the mistress Coral's ill. Third wife is ill. You must come to see her, to the master through the door. And he's like, go away. And they're like, oh, she's going to die. She's going to die. You have to come. So he ends up getting pulled away from the warm bed of his brand new wife to go tend to Coral's feelings, essentially. And then he ends up staying there. And Lotus doesn't see him until the next day. And he's coming out of Coral's house, and she basically says, well, did you call the doctor for her? And he turns all red because he knows he didn't call the doctor. Yeah, doctor, yeah. So it's a whole lot of the Real Housewives of the Real Concubines of ancient China. It's quite a hoot and a holler in some respects. Lotus is inspecting the compound, and she sees, actually she doesn't have to look very far, because way outside her window towards the back there's a garden area, and she sees a well under all this pretty wisteria vine, and she finds out it's called the Well of Death. Cloud, the second wife, tells her that 3 people died in the Well of Death. So it sets this tone for this Well of Death. In the movie, if you want to compare it to it, it's this tower that people have been hanged in. But in the book, it's a Well of Death. The reader learns that in the Chen household that boys are more revered and respected than girls. So having males is better than having females for the master, and also raises you up in the status. Joy had, his first wife, had given him sons. Cloud had not given him a son, but Coral had given him a son. The master is shown to be randy in the beginning. He is taking his fourth wife. They have a nice first evening. He goes off to the second or the third wife's house on command. He's fondling the maids here and there. This randiness, he wears himself out. Lotus does find the master fondling her maid Swallow, and that does make her irritated enough to kick the cat, and of course that makes me go, ugh, I don't really like you that much, Lotus, but it is what it is. So Lotus meets Fei-Pu, who is Joy and the master's eldest son. Whenever there are chrysanthemums put out, and anytime there's any kind of special occasion, the family has these traditions, and they would take the chrysanthemums and in pots and spell out Chinese letters with them. So I guess they had hundreds of chrysanthemums, so they would all get out and they'd look at all these chrysanthemums and they'd spell out things like longevity and strength and prosperity and things like that. So she goes out there early so she can look at them by herself, but then Fei-Pu's there and they're looking at the chrysanthemums. He's asking her which ones that she does like and which ones she doesn't like, and kind of to say that she compares him to a crab claw kind, and she says they're too impudent and she doesn't like it. And so he goes and he removes all the crab claw variety and puts black ones in its place. And so she kind of starts liking Fei-Pu even more. Fei-Pu is more in her age range, and she finds him to be handsome, but Lord, you don't want to start flirting with the master's son, right? So one day she's in her pavilion, we'll call it, and she sees Coral off in the garden singing a Peking opera song near the wisteria vine in the well, and it just evokes so much emotion in Lotus. She starts to cry, and she goes out there, and Coral's like, why are you crying? And she's like, oh, it just moved me to tears. And so Coral breaks the ice with Lotus and asks her to play mahjong. Apparently Coral's addicted to playing mahjong. Wonder why, right? And they need a fourth person to play the mahjong. So Coral starts inviting Lotus over to play, and when she goes over there, and Lotus lets her know right away, I don't know how to play mahjong, and Coral's like, I don't care how much money you lose, I'll pay you back, or all this stuff. While they're playing mahjong, Lotus accidentally drops one of the mahjong tiles, and she goes to pick it up and sees that Coral and the doctor that takes care of all the people at the pavilion, he comes in and he's like the traveling family doctor type thing. Well, she's having an affair apparently with the doctor because she sees their 4 legs are intertwined, all wrapped up under this small little table. And so she gets Coral's number, like, now I know why you like mahjong so much. So you got to think, Lotus is now on the scene. It's not like Sister Wives here in the States where they all allegedly spend only one night and they rotate around. No, the master can stay with Lotus for a year if he wants to and ignore all the other wives sexually. He doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to do. So Coral decides she's going to take up with the doctor. She's going to get her some, and Lotus doesn't say anything about it. So she gets the message that Coral's getting her some. Or she assumes she is. I mean, that they're all intertwined underneath the table. The first eldest son, Fei-Pu, is out there playing his flute, and it's almost like the Pied Piper. He's out there playing the flute. He mesmerizes Lotus. So she gets inspired to go retrieve her father's flute. She had arrived at the Chen family compound with this wicker basket. Just one wicker basket with all her things in it, and she really did not have a reason to get into her student clothes. So the wicker basket had been put away, and she remembers her father's flutes in there. So she hears this sound, and it reminds her of her father, and she goes to get her father's flute out of the wicker basket, and it's not there. So of course she's going to ask her maid, because the maid does everything for her. And she accuses, the flute's gone. She accuses Swallow of stealing the flute. And Swallow says, ask anybody here at the Chen compound. I've never stolen as much as a dime from anyone here. I would never steal. I may be a servant by birth, but, I would never steal. So what she does, Because Lotus isn't exactly a sweetheart. She goes into Swallow's room, and Swallow has a trunk, and she busts the trunk open. She doesn't find the flute. But you know what she finds? She finds essentially a voodoo doll. Yes, guys, this is... Okay, now you're like interested, huh? She finds a freaking voodoo doll. And it's got... it's a little cloth doll, and it looks like Lotus. And it's got the little words in Chinese writing. Lotus. A little... So, yeah. So she wigs out on Swallow, as one would imagine. Then she realizes that Swallow is illiterate. So Swallow is not the one that wrote the words Lotus on the voodoo doll. So who did it, right? She has to try to figure this out. So she starts threatening Swallow, saying she won't tell about the voodoo doll, which would be, oh gosh, that would be a big problem. Because think, the master's not going to like that. The first wife who's a Buddhist isn't going to like it. None of the others are going to like it. Nobody's going to be happy, essentially, right? I won't tell that you have made a voodoo doll of me and you are cursing me if you tell me who wrote my name on the voodoo doll. She says, it was Joy, wasn't it? No. It was Coral then, wasn't it? No. Cloud? Second mistress? The one that's nice to me? Cloud? Yeah, it was Cloud. It was the one that pretends to be sunshine and daisies and roses. That is the one that is cursing you. That is the one that is helping your maid to ruin your situation, who is cursing you. So, oh, she is so disappointed that the one that she thought she could get along with, other than Coral, like it's a real tentative relationship with Coral. She realizes she was essentially being used by Coral. So, yeah, she thought she had an ally in Cloud, and that is blown. So, she goes and asks the master, where's my flute? Because she knows now that Swallow didn't have anything to do with the flute. And he's like, oh, I had my servant burn it. I thought maybe when you were at school, some guy gave it to you. So I had my servant burn it. And she tells him, that was my dad's flute. And she just sits there until it turns dark in the room. There's some really beautiful passages, but she sits there until it turns dark in the room. And then when he turns on a red lantern, she won't talk to him, and he sees she's just white and crying. He's like, I can't stand anybody pouting. You know, this guy, he's so immature. But yeah, for a 50-year-old, he's quite immature. So he takes off to one of the other wives' house, and she gets the idea. This is how it goes with the master. This is how it goes. You have to literally be pleasing him all the time. He can do something really rotten and not trust you and burn your father's flute. Granted, he didn't know it was her father's. And then when, you're upset about it, you're just crying, you're not cursing him out, he just goes and runs off to another wife. I mean, this is the life with the master. You are literally a possession of his. This really, it hurts her. Because she turns him down sexually. He wants sex, and she turns him down because he's burned her father's flute. And so he goes and hightails it off to another wife. No skin off his nose, What does he care? He'll get another one, right? He'll get a new wife. So just as karma would have it, Cloud shows up because he'd run off. Master Chen ran off to Cloud's for the night, and Cloud, all puffed up and full of herself, shows up to Lotus's compound for a haircut. Oh, I want to look good for the master, that kind of crap. And so what Lotus does is she proceeds to try to cut Cloud's hair and tells her, I don't know how to do this. And she ends up snipping Cloud's right ear. She doesn't cut it completely off or anything, but it's quite amusing. But she literally doesn't know why she did it. It was an unconscious ear clip, but she clips Cloud's ear, and Cloud gets very incensed. And Coral comes on the scene due to all the wailing and the weeping, and pretty much tells Lotus that if she hated somebody, she'd also do something to, like that, to Cloud. Essentially, if I hated somebody, I'd do that too. And then Coral confides to Lotus some really serious things about how Cloud is not who she pretends to be, and that she had tried to abort when Coral's baby, when Coral was pregnant. Cloud was also pregnant, and they both were in a rush to have the baby first, both assuming they would have male children, and whoever had the baby first would be higher in rank and prestige. And so Cloud had allegedly slipped some abortion tonic into Coral's food or drink. So she had serious, that's how nasty Cloud could be. So time passes by, and Lotus is figuring out what everybody in the Chen household is all about. Joy is older, and she is bound by traditions. She's over it. I don't think she even really truly cares who the master's sleeping with. She's got her children. Their children are the most beloved in the family. Fei Pu's at university. The daughter's at university too. The second mistress is scheming and willing to try to abort a sister wife's baby, and she is willing to get servants to curse their mistresses. She's a backstabbing witch. And the third mistress is an opera singer that's very beautiful, that has had previous battles with second wife, that can be kind of sneaky herself, but isn't seemingly as nasty, and is now just going ahead and having her own affair. And so if she can keep, I guess, Master happy, then that's, about the best she's got going for her. She doesn't have a child yet. And this is kind of the situation that you get out of the novel at this point. Lotus smells that they're burning leaves. And again, this whole novel is bent on tradition, bending towards anything that's a tradition. It's going to be kept the same way. And they apparently get a lot of leaves that fall, and 4 times a year they burn the leaves, and they burn them in the same spot, and it blows into her pavilion, and she hates that smell. So she gets really mad, and she yells at the servants for burning the leaves. And the first mistress takes issue because this is an old custom. You don't shirk, you don't change the old customs. And Lotus likes to compare plants to people, because think her name is symbolic. She is a lotus. So she sees that, you're burning these leaves, and it's like you're burning people. And Joy's like, you're insane. No, leaves aren't people. And, why can't you follow the customs? And Joy doesn't understand where Lotus gets off bossing the servants around about a custom. And she tells her, what do you amount to? So she's always getting checked about what she's into, what she came from, and what she's into, and where her status is in the household. I mean, it would make you feel really bad. The master has his 50th birthday bash coming on in custom. They're going to have a big party. And they have big 3-foot vases around this place, and the kids are running around, the younger children, and they knock over a vase, and it starts this huge family fight that Lotus truly isn't involved with. But she goes, it gives you a precursor to something that happens later. That's the only reason I mention it. So Lotus takes to gazing in that well of death, and she gets completely spooked out. She thinks that she sees some hand over her mouth and reaching out for her, and she starts thinking, oh, this well's absolutely haunted, but she keeps going to see it. At this 50th birthday party dinner, she sees that all the other concubines have given Master all these really extravagant gifts, like furs and the like. And so she decides, she's the 4th wife. She doesn't have a lot of status in this household. What she's been giving him is pleasure. So just almost like as a whim, because she gives him a gift, but then when she goes to put it on the table, she hasn't done it the right way with the right red silk ribbon and all these customs, because she doesn't know. So she decides to give him the gift of 2 kisses, and she gives it to him right in front of all the others. And this sets off a huge spark. He's embarrassed by it, and then the others are just appalled by the fact she kissed him right here on his lips at the table. And so it causes a big scene, and she gets terribly hurt. So Lotus runs back to her pavilion, all upset that she's caused an uproar by kissing the master in front of the others and giving him the gift of love in front of the other wives. Oh. And so at one point she's talking to Coral, and Coral confides to Lotus that if the master doesn't satisfy her once in every 5 days, that she told the master that she would find some man who would. But you get the impression that Coral's kind of a big talker, in the sense that she might have said it to the master, but the master probably didn't take her seriously. And at this point, Lotus lets Coral know that she knows about the doctor. And Coral gets ticked, thinking, I guess she thinks that then Lotus will go and tell. Lotus was just saying, I know about you and the doctor, but you don't get the impression that Lotus would go against Coral at this point and tattle her out. So the master comes back into Lotus's bed, as you know he would, because look at his other options. And, Coral's getting a piece on the side, and she's getting sassy. Cloud is just manipulative, and first wife he's been done with her for 40 years. And so he eventually makes his way back into Lotus's bed, but it turns out he's now got a little ED problems. He's got some erectile dysfunction, and Lotus is trying to help him, but it's not working, and so he decides that maybe a certain sexual position would get his juices flowing, and she finds this to be extremely distasteful and doesn't want to do this sexual position, and she starts crying and says, well, that would make me a dog, and she refuses him. There's a quote in the book that's like, what, just get the old master through the night, which was just kind of like, some of this stuff is so funny. So Coral was telling Lotus, like, you just got to get the old master through the night. And so Coral takes to operatically singing songs of suicide outside of Lotus's pavilion. And it's almost comical, because she knows that now that Lotus is also having a hard time with the old master. And so, it's I don't know if it's meant to be funny, but it is funny. And Coral does then tell Lotus that the women that had died in the well committed adultery, and that is why they were in the well, which really gets Lotus's mind going. Oh my gosh, adultery, adultery, adultery. How did these women get... She's becoming obsessed with the well of death. More domestics occur at the Real Concubines of China, and Cloud accuses Coral of paying another school kid to beat up her daughter, and they go back and forth. I think it does come out that maybe Coral paid $1 for some other kid to whap on Cloud's kids. Oh, this thing's it's dark comedy, let's put it that way, or a little bit campy. It's not meant to be funny, but it is. It's so bad it's good. Lotus, she can't catch a break. She finds a blood curse. Yes, a blood curse. She goes to use the toilet and sees this piece of paper, and she goes and she gets this feeling like this is something, and she picks it out. I guess, I don't know if it's a latrine or if it's an outhouse, but it's like a common toilet. And she finds this piece of paper, and when she undoes it, and she knows that Swallow must be using it, so it's the one maybe in her pavilion, and she sees a figure sketched in like blood, right? And it's a figure of Lotus, again with the cursing. So she gets Swallow and makes her account for what she has done, and Swallow admits that she did it. And so Lotus says, here, I'm going to give you two choices. Now you've done a blood curse on me. You have two choices. One, you make it public that you've done this. You've taken your menstrual blood and you've drawn a figure of me, and you've folded it up and you've thrown it in the toilet. That's symbolic of throwing me in the toilet. You either admit it and make it public here at the house, or you get to eat this piece of toilet paper thing. You get to eat it. And so Swallow takes option 2. I'll eat it, right? And what do you think happens to Swallow? She develops typhoid. Yes, Swallow develops typhoid. So in the movie, she did something else, and she ends up being punished. She had the red lantern. See, that's not a huge symbol in this novel. The novel is actually titled Wives and Concubines. But for the English published, they called it Raise the Red Lantern. But in the movie, the maid has raised a red lantern in her own area, signifying that she's a wife, and she's punished, and she has to stand out in the cold, and she develops pneumonia or something of that nature. And that's how she dies, but not in the book. It's actually more interesting in the book, but maybe they felt it was too scatological, with the the blood in the toilet, who knows. So Mama Song, who had been in the Chen household for generations, is now assigned to be Lotus's her new servant. And this is an older lady. She, like I said, she's been around for generations. She knew all the wives. She knew the old master's dad. And she tells Lotus that the last concubine who died in the well of death, was fooling around with a tofu peddler. In a way, this should have been in the movie because it is crazy. A tofu peddler, right? And I think she was even asking how in the world how she managed fooling around with the tofu peddler, but apparently the tofu was just like the best tofu in China, and he would come in with his goods, and I guess that happened. So she was caught doing it, and that's how she died, in this well. So she's finding out more and more about the people that died in this well of death, finding out they're pretty much all concubines, and they all pretty much committed adultery. And this is just scaring her more and more and more. So she starts fearing the well of death, and she starts sleeping with the light on. Again, kind of like a raising the red lantern. The red lantern actually is a symbol that the master's in your bedroom, and that you're favored by the master. That's the symbol of it, but it's really not something that's in this book, even though it's in the title. Go figure. So the penultimate moment in the book is Lotus's birthday. Her birthday's on December 12th, and she realizes that it's not been marked or noted or anything. There's nothing special. She's almost forgotten her birthday. So she decides to get drunk. And she gets one of the maids to come and bring her wine and some things. And she just goes on a bender. She goes on a complete bender, and it gets around the compound that she's drinking. And I think Mama Song comes in and tells her, Swallow's dead. Because Swallow had been sent to hospital for the typhoid. And she finds out Swallow's dead, and it just makes it worse. She drinks more. And that Swallow had died calling out Lotus's name. That is what Mama Song tells her, which even makes it even worse. It's like, she's cursing me, in her last breath, she's cursing me. Fei Pu comes over, finds out, yep, she's drinking, and he tries to flirt with her, and she sees that she's almost being trapped by Fei Pu. But then she decides to still come on to him, and he basically tells her that he's not into the ladies. Again, that's different from the movie. So Fei Pu's really just not into the ladies. He's afraid of the ladies, and he's really just not into the ladies. So Lotus can't satisfy herself. She makes such a ruckus that the other concubines come in to give her like a tonic, to get an anti-drunk tonic or something. I want to know what that is, by the way. I don't know if it was Ipecac or whatever, but there's apparently some medicine to cure drunkenness, and they're trying to pry her mouth open and give it to her because she's just on one, carrying on. And it just so happens also that Cloud has discovered at the same time that Coral is having an affair with the doctor, and they've been at the inn. In the movie, the cat's let out of the bag by the fourth mistress. In the book, no. But they did a good job in the movie making that arc, that change. So while Lotus is on a drunken bender, carrying on, and some of the household's trying to pry open her mouth and give her a tonic for drunkenness, third mistress Coral's caught having an affair at the end, and gets thrown in the well. And Lotus sees this because she can see the well from her compound, unlike most of the others. And when the master does come to her, she is screaming. And he's like, "What did you see?" And she's like, "Murder, murder, murder." And she loses her mind. I'm going to read it to you. Everything was completely silent for about 2 minutes until Lotus let out a wild, blood-curdling wail. When Chen Zuquan, that's the master, burst into her room, he saw her standing barefoot in the middle of the floor, frantically tearing her hair out. Lotus went on wailing distractedly. The look in her eyes was dull and lifeless, and her face resembled nothing more than a sheet of white paper. Chen Zuquan, that's the master, guided her over to the bed. He clearly understood that this was Lotus's final day. That young college girl Lotus was no more. Chen Zuquan pressed the blanket down over her body and asked, "What did you see? What did you see?" "Murder," Lotus answered. Murder. Nonsense, Chen Zuquan said. What did you see? You didn't see anything. You're out of your mind. Later that morning, the Chen household was rocked by two startling stories. Third Mistress Coral had thrown herself into the well to drown her shame, and fourth Mistress Lotus had gone insane. Everyone generally agreed that Coral's death was perfectly natural and reasonable. Licentious women and adulterous wives never come to a good end. But why would the young, perfectly healthy and refined fourth Mistress Lotus suddenly lose her mind? Why in the world, right? Those who are familiar with the inner workings of the Chen household said that was very simple. The fox mourns the death of the hare. Creatures of the same kind grieve for one another. That's all. So essentially that Lotus was most like Coral, and so once Coral was killed, Lotus essentially would lose it too. And so then, sure enough, by the spring of the following year, the master is taking his next wife named Bamboo. Yeah. So Bamboo sees Lotus just wandering around the well, and they say that it ends a very horror story way, very spooky. They said that Lotus would say, "I won't jump, I won't jump." She says she won't jump into the well. So essentially Lotus was just losing her mind, wandering around the well, looking in, maybe looking for her third sister wife, and saying, "I won't jump, I won't jump." So it's a really great novella, Raise the Red Lantern. There's 2 other novellas with it, so you get 3 for 1. There was one called Opium Family. That's the third one. I did enjoy that one. 1934 Escapees, or 1934 Escapes. I didn't really enjoy that one. That's why I didn't review it. I mean, I didn't review it for you guys, but I highly recommend the first novella. If you liked this review, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe bell. What that does is anytime I upload a new video, it just lets you know that I've uploaded a video, and you can choose to watch it, or you can say, nein danke. But I thank you so much for watching. Reading books like this, like Raise the Red Lantern, during this time of pandemic and quarantine helps me, and I'm sure a lot of other readers, to escape into another world and to get out of our own heads for a little while. So I hope you like this, and I hope you have an excellent day. Take care.